There comes a moment in a person's life when he must decide whether he will continue waiting for the world to approve the man he is becoming. We are often taught, quietly and from childhood, to look outward before we move inward. We ask whether others will understand, whether they will approve, whether they will think us arrogant, selfish, strange, or different. And so we remain where we are, not because we are satisfied, but because dissatisfaction seems safer when everyone around us is comfortable with it. Yet there is something deeply strange about asking permission to become better. No one needs permission to become more honest, more disciplined, more courageous, more patient, or more faithful to what he knows is right. The permission we seek is often not permission at all, but reassurance. We want someone to tell us that the road will be easy, that our friends will remain, that our habits will not have to die, and that becoming stronger will cost us nothing we are unwilling to lose. But growth has never made such promises. There is a peculiar freedom that begins when you stop explaining every good decision you make. You no longer need everyone to understand why you wake early, why you refuse certain pleasures, why you protect your attention, why you walk away from distractions, or why you have decided that your future deserves more respect than your present comfort. You begin to understand that a life cannot be built by committee. And this is where many people become frightened, because the moment you stop asking for permission, you become responsible for the direction of your own life. You can no longer blame the people who discouraged you. You can no longer say that you would have changed if someone had believed in you. The responsibility becomes wonderfully and terribly yours. Perhaps that is why people so often remain unchanged. It is easier to ask for permission than to accept responsibility. Easier to wait for encouragement than to develop conviction. Easier to remain familiar than to become someone your former habits no longer recognize. But your life was never meant to be a waiting room. There is a better version of you that cannot be reached by approval, applause, or permission. It is reached by decision, quiet decisions, difficult decisions, decisions made when nobody is watching and nobody is impressed. The decision to begin before you feel ready. The decision to continue when nobody notices. The decision to become better, even when the people around you prefer the version of you they already know. There is a curious weakness in human nature, which we rarely admit, and that is our desire to be approved before we are willing to become. We say that we want to improve ourselves, but often what we really want is for everyone around us to agree that our improvement is sensible. We want encouragement before we begin, applause before we endure, and understanding before we make a difficult choice. Yet the deepest changes in a person's life rarely begin with the approval of others. They begin with a private decision that may, for a time, be understood by no one. You must learn to recognize the difference between wisdom and permission. Wisdom may come from another person. Good counsel may save you from foolishness. There are moments when humility requires us to listen, to reconsider, and even to admit that we are wrong. But permission is something different. Permission says, I will become who I ought to become only if you are comfortable with it. And if your life is governed by such a rule, you have quietly handed the steering wheel of your character to people who may not even know where you are going. Consider how strange this is. You do not ask your neighbors for permission to grow older. You do not ask your friends whether you may become more patient. You do not require the approval of strangers before deciding to abandon a destructive habit. Yet when the change becomes difficult, visible, or unfamiliar, suddenly we become concerned with what everyone will think. The fear of being misunderstood can become a prison more comfortable than failure. At least failure can be blamed on circumstances. But becoming different forces you to confront the possibility that some people may no longer recognize you. The friend who enjoyed your lack of discipline may not celebrate your discipline. The person who benefited from your weakness may not applaud your strength. Those accustomed to your excuses may find your new seriousness inconvenient. This does not mean that every person who questions your growth is an enemy. Sometimes the people who challenge us are the very people who love us enough to tell us the truth. The point is not to become stubborn against all advice. The point is to stop confusing disagreement with disapproval and disapproval with danger. There is a great difference between listening carefully and living anxiously. A mature person listens, weighs, examines, and then decides. He does not surrender his conscience merely because another voice is louder. He does not abandon a good path simply because it has become lonely. He understands that a crowd can be sincere and still be mistaken, just as one quiet person can be uncertain and still be right about the direction he must take. Your growth will sometimes require you to disappoint the expectations people have placed upon you. This is one of the uncomfortable prices of becoming honest with yourself. People become accustomed to the version of you they have known. If you change, their picture of you must change as well. Some will celebrate it. Some will question it. Some will quietly hope you return to the person who made them more comfortable. You cannot build your life around managing those reactions. If you do, you will spend your years editing yourself for an audience that is too distracted to notice the sacrifice. You will choose the safer word, the easier habit, the familiar weakness, and the comfortable excuse because each one receives immediate approval. Meanwhile, the person you could have become remains somewhere beyond those small compromises, waiting for you to stop asking whether you are allowed to pursue him. There is a strange thing about becoming better. We imagine that everyone will be pleased when we improve. But this is not always so. We like to believe that our growth will be greeted with applause, that those around us will rejoice when we become more disciplined, more serious, more thoughtful, and more determined. Sometimes they will. But sometimes your growth will disturb people precisely because it changes the relationship they have with you. This is not necessarily because they are cruel. Human beings become accustomed to familiar arrangements. We learn how another person behaves, what they tolerate, what they avoid, how easily they can be persuaded, and where their boundaries are. When that person begins to change, the old arrangement becomes uncertain. A person who once said yes to everything begins to say no. A person who was always available begins to protect his time. A person who constantly complained begins to take responsibility. A person who lived for approval begins to live according to conviction. And suddenly, what looked like improvement from the inside may look like rejection from the outside. This is one of the more painful lessons of maturity. You may have to disappoint people in order to stop disappointing yourself. You may have to allow someone to misunderstand your silence, because explaining yourself would require you to return to an older version of yourself. You may have to endure the uncomfortable suspicion that you have become distant when, in truth, you have simply become more deliberate about where you place your attention. There is wisdom in learning not to interpret every negative reaction as evidence that you are doing something wrong. If you have always been careless with your time and suddenly become disciplined, someone may call you boring. If you have always participated in every distraction and suddenly refuse, someone may say you have changed. If you stop entertaining conversations that weaken your character, someone may accuse you of thinking you are better than everyone else. Perhaps you are not better. Perhaps you are simply trying to become better than you were yesterday. That distinction matters. Growth is not superiority. Discipline is not arrogance. Boundaries are not hatred. Silence is not weakness. And refusing to return to an unhealthy pattern does not mean you have declared war upon the people who remain in it. You must be careful, however, not to use personal growth as an excuse for pride. There is a counterfeit form of improvement in which a person becomes so pleased with his discipline that he begins to despise those who are still struggling. That is not strength. It is merely another form of insecurity wearing respectable clothing. Real growth should make a person more grounded, not more contemptuous. But humility does not mean making yourself smaller so that others can remain comfortable. There will be moments when you must continue walking, even though someone you love does not understand the direction. You can listen to their concerns. You can examine your motives. You can admit your mistakes. You can remain kind. But after all of this, there may still come a moment when you must choose. And choice is where character becomes visible. The world often teaches us to measure a decision by how many people approve of it. But some of the most important decisions in life are made before approval arrives, and some never receive it at all. You may have to begin without encouragement. You may have to continue without recognition. You may have to become disciplined while others call your discipline unnecessary. The uncomfortable truth is that you cannot make everyone comfortable with the person you are becoming. If you spend your life protecting others from the discomfort of your growth, you may eventually discover that you have protected them at the expense of your own potential. You will have preserved the old relationship, the old reputation, the old expectations, and perhaps even the old version of yourself. But only by refusing to become what you were capable of becoming. There comes a point in every life when excuses begin to lose their usefulness. At first, it is natural to blame circumstances. We blame our upbringing, our failures, our surroundings, our lack of opportunity, the people who disappointed us, and the seasons in which life seemed unfair. Some of these things may indeed have wounded us, and wisdom does not require us to pretend otherwise. But there is a difference between explaining where you came from and surrendering responsibility for where you are going. You cannot choose everything that happens to you, but you are continually choosing what you will do with what happens to you. This is a difficult truth because responsibility gives us freedom and burden at the same time. If everything is someone else's fault, then everything is also someone else's power. You remain dependent upon the person who hurt you, the circumstance that delayed you, or the opportunity that never came. But when you accept responsibility, you take something back. You may not be able to rewrite yesterday, but you can refuse to let yesterday write every page that follows. There is a temptation to wait until life becomes easier before becoming the person you know you should be. We tell ourselves that we will become disciplined when circumstances settle down, courageous when fear disappears, focused when distractions become fewer, and consistent when motivation finally arrives. But character is rarely formed under perfect conditions. It is formed when conditions are imperfect and you choose wisely anyway. You must therefore stop asking only, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "What is required of me now?" That question changes a person's posture toward life. The first question can leave you staring at the past. The second turns your attention toward action. One searches endlessly for an explanation, the other searches for responsibility. There are seasons when you will have every reason to complain, and perhaps every reason will be valid. Yet validity does not make complaint a substitute for action. You are responsible for the habits you continue. You are responsible for the words you repeatedly speak to yourself. You are responsible for whether you keep returning to the same excuse after you have already discovered the truth. You are responsible for the small decisions nobody applauds. This does not mean you must carry the entire world upon your shoulders. It means you must learn to distinguish between what belongs to you and what does not. You cannot control another person's opinion, but you can control whether you allow that opinion to govern your choices. You cannot control how quickly success arrives, but you can control whether you continue preparing. You cannot control what someone did to you, but you can decide whether bitterness will become part of your identity. There is dignity in this kind of responsibility because it removes the need to wait for rescue. You begin to understand that your future is not created by one heroic decision. It is shaped by ordinary decisions repeated until they become character. Every time you keep a promise you made to yourself, you strengthen your ability to trust yourself. Every time you choose the difficult good over the easy comfort, you become slightly less controlled by your feelings. Every time you refuse to surrender your standards merely because nobody is watching, you become more capable of living according to conviction rather than applause. And perhaps this is why responsibility can feel frightening at first. Once you accept it, you have fewer places to hide. You can no longer tell yourself that you are powerless when there is something within your reach. You cannot change every circumstance, but there is almost always something you can do next. Do that thing, then do the next thing. Do not wait for your entire life to become understandable before you begin living it responsibly. The path becomes clearer through movement. A person does not discover his strength merely by thinking about strength. He discovers it by meeting difficulty and discovering that he can remain standing. Your future self is being formed quietly by what you repeatedly permit, pursue, refuse, and endure. You are becoming someone every day, whether you intend to or not. The only real question is whether you will take responsibility for the direction of that becoming or leave it to habit, circumstance, and the opinions of others, hoping that one day you will somehow wake up as the person you could have chosen to become now. 7. There is a kind of comfort that does not feel like comfort at first. It feels like belonging. It feels like being understood. It feels like knowing that the people around you approve of your choices. Yet sometimes what we call belonging is merely the relief of never having to challenge the expectations that have been placed upon us. We remain agreeable, predictable, and familiar, and because nobody objects, we mistake the absence of conflict for the presence of peace. But discipline often disturbs that peace. To become disciplined is to begin saying no where you once said yes. It is to close the door when everyone else is inviting you to remain outside. It is to keep a promise to yourself, even when there is no immediate reward for keeping it. And because people are accustomed to the version of you that gives in, your refusal may seem strange to them. You may discover that some people preferred your weakness because your weakness required nothing from them. A disciplined person becomes less available to every impulse. He does not answer every desire simply because it has appeared. He does not abandon tomorrow merely because today offers him something pleasant. He learns that feelings are real, but they are not always wise guides. There are moments when the right thing feels unpleasant, inconvenient, and lonely, and yet remains the right thing. This is where discipline becomes more than productivity. It becomes a form of freedom. A person who cannot say no to himself will eventually find that everyone else can say yes on his behalf. Every distraction receives his attention. Every invitation controls his schedule. Every criticism changes his direction. Every desire becomes an order. He may call himself free because nobody is forcing him to do anything, while secretly being ruled by everything that happens to pass through his mind. Discipline breaks this arrangement. It teaches you that you can experience discomfort without obeying it. You can feel tired without immediately quitting. You can feel tempted without surrendering. You can be misunderstood without rushing to explain yourself. You can be alone without desperately seeking company simply to avoid hearing your own thoughts. And this will sometimes make you less popular. There is no need to pretend otherwise. When you stop participating in every distraction, some people will have less access to you. When you stop laughing at what you once tolerated, certain conversations will become uncomfortable. When you begin protecting your time, people accustomed to having it freely may consider you difficult, but acceptance is a poor foundation upon which to build a life. If you must constantly sacrifice your principles to remain accepted, then what you have gained is not friendship, but permission to belong at the price of yourself. True friendship can survive your growth. True affection does not require you to remain weak so that another person can remain comfortable. You must therefore learn to tolerate the temporary loneliness that can accompany discipline, not because loneliness is inherently noble, but because there are seasons in which becoming stronger requires you to spend less time being entertained by the approval of others. You may have to work while others rest. You may have to study while others waste the evening. You may have to remain silent while others seek attention. You may have to walk away from habits that once gave you pleasure, because you have finally understood what those pleasures were costing you. The world will often reward immediate comfort and leave long-term consequences hidden. Discipline reverses this pattern. It accepts a little discomfort now in order to prevent a greater regret later. It chooses the harder road because it understands that ease has a price too. There is also something deeply humbling about disciplined living. It reminds you that you are not as important as your feelings make you believe. Not every mood deserves a decision. Not every desire deserves fulfillment. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Sometimes the mature thing is simply to continue doing what you already know is right quietly, consistently, without demanding that anyone understand why. There is a particular kind of work that must be done without witnesses. It is the work that changes a person before it changes his circumstances. No applause accompanies it. No one announces that you have become more disciplined, more patient, more focused, or more courageous. In fact, the people around you may see very little difference at all. You may still have the same room, the same responsibilities, the same difficulties, and perhaps even the same failures, yet something within you has begun to move. This is where many people lose heart. They expect progress to be visible before they are willing to continue. They want evidence that their sacrifice is producing something. They want someone to notice the early mornings, the difficult choices, the temptations resisted, the hours spent learning, and the opportunities they declined because they had decided that their future mattered more than immediate pleasure. But much of what is valuable grows unseen. A seed does not become a tree by standing in front of an audience. It grows beneath the soil in darkness, where nobody applauds its effort. There are seasons in your own life that may feel equally hidden. You may be doing everything you can, and still appear unchanged to the world. This can be discouraging if your motivation depends upon recognition. But perhaps the hidden season is teaching you something that applause never could. It is teaching you to work because the work is worthy, not because someone is watching. There is a great difference between being motivated by recognition and being strengthened by conviction. Recognition says, I will continue if someone notices. Conviction says, I will continue because I know this matters. The first is dependent upon an audience. The second can survive in silence, and silence reveals the quality of a person's motives. Anyone can perform discipline when others are watching. Anyone can speak confidently about ambition when there is an audience. Anyone can appear committed when praise is available. But what do you do when nobody knows whether you succeeded or failed? What do you do when there is no photograph, no compliment, no reward, and no one waiting to congratulate you? That is where character begins to separate itself from performance. You must become comfortable with progress that cannot immediately be displayed. Not every achievement needs to be announced. Not every victory needs to become a story. Some victories are meant to remain between you and the person you are becoming. There is something powerful about keeping certain improvements private. When you stop constantly displaying your progress, you become less concerned with maintaining an image and more concerned with becoming the reality behind it. You no longer need to convince people that you are disciplined because your habits are quietly proving it to you. This does not mean recognition is evil. Encouragement is good. Appreciation can strengthen us. There is nothing wrong with being grateful when someone notices our effort. The danger begins when recognition becomes necessary for continuation. If nobody praises you, will you still do what is right? If nobody notices your sacrifice, will you still make it? If nobody knows how hard you worked, will the work still be worth doing? These questions expose something important. A person who can continue without applause has discovered a deeper source of strength. He is no longer borrowing his confidence from the opinions of others. He is learning to stand upon his own convictions. There will be days when your progress seems invisible even to you. You will wonder whether the discipline is changing anything. You will question whether the sacrifices are worth their cost. You may look at someone else who seems to be advancing effortlessly and wonder why your own path feels so slow. But comparison is often impatient with the truth. A tree does not become strong by constantly measuring itself against another tree. It grows according to the conditions, seasons, and responsibilities given to it. Your task is not to make your growth impressive to strangers. Your task is to make it real. So keep building. Keep learning when nobody praises your effort. Keep choosing discipline when nobody knows what you resisted. Keep protecting your attention when nobody understands why. Keep becoming more honest, more capable, and more faithful to what you know is good, even if the world remains completely unaware of the work happening within you. There is perhaps no greater tragedy than to live for years beneath the shadow of a person you might have become. Not because you were incapable, but because you were continually waiting for confidence, waiting for permission, waiting for the right circumstances, waiting until fear became quiet enough to move, and while you waited, life continued its ordinary movement, carrying days away that could never be recovered. You are becoming someone whether you choose the direction or not. Your habits are shaping you. Your repeated thoughts are shaping you. The things you tolerate are shaping you. The decisions you make when nobody is watching are shaping you. Even your excuses have a kind of craftsmanship, for every excuse repeated often enough becomes part of the character that speaks it. The question, then, is not whether you will become someone. You will. The question is whether you will participate consciously in that becoming. There is a version of you that is capable of more patience than you currently possess, more courage than you currently display, more discipline than your present habits reveal. This does not mean that some perfect person is hidden inside you waiting to be discovered without effort. It means that human beings possess possibilities that are developed through choice. Potential is not a treasure buried in the ground that becomes valuable simply because it exists. It must be cultivated, tested, disciplined, and brought into action. And this is where many people misunderstand personal growth. They imagine that becoming better should make life easier. But often it makes you more aware of what must be changed. You begin to see your own contradictions. You notice how often you choose comfort over courage, attention over reflection, appearance over substance. The better you understand yourself, the less satisfied you become with pretending. This can be uncomfortable, but discomfort is not always evidence that something is wrong. Sometimes discomfort is the feeling of an old identity being asked to make room for a new one. You may have spent years believing that you are simply a distracted person, a fearful person, an inconsistent person, a person who always quits. But identities are often strengthened by repetition, and what has been repeated can be interrupted. You do not have to remain loyal to every description you have ever given yourself. Perhaps you failed yesterday. That does not require you to fail today. Perhaps you were undisciplined for years. That does not make discipline impossible now. Perhaps you have spent too much of your life seeking approval. That does not mean you must spend the remainder of it doing the same. There is tremendous freedom in understanding that your past may explain you without having the authority to command you. But becoming the person you are capable of becoming will require sacrifice. Some habits must die. Some distractions must lose their place. Some relationships may need healthier boundaries. Some comforts must be refused. And some fantasies about who you thought you were must be surrendered, because they have become excuses for remaining unchanged. This is why growth is rarely dramatic in the beginning. It often looks like waking up and doing the ordinary thing you previously avoided. It looks like keeping one promise, reading one page, finishing one task, holding your tongue when anger would be easier, returning to the work after failure, choosing the difficult action before the comfortable one. These things appear small because we are fascinated by dramatic transformation. Yet character is built through small choices repeated until they become natural. You do not need to become extraordinary tomorrow. You need to become faithful today. And tomorrow you must do it again. There will be moments when you will be tempted to look around and ask whether anyone notices. Resist that temptation. Your life is not a performance stage for the approval of an audience. The deepest purpose of growth is not to make strangers admire you, but to make your actions increasingly worthy of the person you know you ought to be. You may never receive recognition for many of the battles you win, You may never be thanked for the discipline that kept you from destroying something valuable. You may never receive applause for choosing patience, honesty, restraint, or perseverance. But these things still matter. The strongest changes often begin where nobody can see them. So stop waiting for the perfect moment to become the person you already know you can be. Stop treating your potential as though it requires permission from the world. Stop asking whether you feel ready enough to begin. Readiness is often produced by movement, not granted before it. Begin with what is in your hands. Begin with the habit you know must change. Begin with the decision you have been postponing. Begin quietly, imperfectly, and without demanding certainty about every step ahead, because the person you are capable of becoming is not waiting somewhere in the future to rescue you from the present. That person is being formed now, through what you choose to do with this ordinary moment.